Thanks so much for joining in with us on this episode of 5-Minute Bible Studies. My name is Tanner Campbell, and in this episode we're going to be considering the Bible in just one word. How can we fit all of the Bible, all the commandments in the Bible into one word? Well, we're really not going to do it, but the Bible itself is going to do it. We can look at this in a number of places, and it is so fascinating. For example, when Jesus was asked, what is the greatest commandment of them all? He said in Matthew chapter 22 and verse 37, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself." And then he goes on to say, on these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. And so these two commandments, loving the Lord and loving our neighbor, he says, hang every other law, every other thing that the prophets said. So he's basically talking about the entirety of the Old Testament. The entire Old Testament hang on simply two different commandments. How can that be so? Well, we find also in Galatians chapter 5 and verse 13, Paul saying to the church in Galatia, "For you, brethren, have been called to liberty, only do not use liberty as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For all the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself." So here, very similarly to what we saw Jesus saying, Paul says here that all of the law can be fulfilled in only one word, and the focal point there is love. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Again, what exactly does this mean? How can all of the other commandments be fulfilled through this one commandment, you shall love your neighbor as yourself? Well, we find here in another place really the same idea, but with a little bit more of an explanation. In Romans chapter 13, beginning there in verse 7, Paul says to the church at Rome, "Owe no one anything except to love one another, for he who loves another has fulfilled the law. For the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, you shall not covet, and if there is any other commandment, are all summed up in this saying, namely, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no harm to a neighbor, therefore love is the fulfillment of the law." And so we see here Paul giving actual commandments, examples of actual commandments, and how they all fall in line or hang off of this one commandment to love. Notice the examples he gives. You shall not commit adultery. If I'm loving my neighbor, and certainly my neighbor, one of my neighbors is my spouse, absolutely. If I love my spouse, that is to say, will I commit adultery against her? Absolutely not. If I'm fulfilling that commandment to love her, I will not be unfaithful to her. What else? Well, the next commandment he gives is you shall not murder. If I'm loving my neighbor, am I going to murder my neighbor? No. How about stealing? The third example he gives, you shall not steal. If I love my neighbor, am I going to steal from them? Certainly not. Or if I love my neighbor, am I going to bear false witness against them? Absolutely not. And the last example he gives is, if I love my neighbor, am I going to covet them, covet who they are, covet the things that they have? No, I'm going to rejoice in who they are. I'm going to be pleased with what they have. I'm going to be very happy for them, for whatever they have, that normally if I was not walking in love, I might covet those things, but because of my love for them, and I'm walking in love towards them, I'm not going to covet anything about them or what they have. And so he says here that all the commandments can be fulfilled. He says if there's any other commandment, they can all be fulfilled in this one commandment to love. We can go through the entirety of the Bible, look at every single commandment, but what we're going to find is the root of it all is founded on loving God and loving our neighbor. And so the Bible, all the commandments of the Bible can be summarized under one single word: love. If I'm loving my God and if I'm loving my neighbor, I can fulfill every other commandment found in the Word of God.